Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today, in our 463rd episode, we have a bunch of news, including a new titanosaur. We have a new large unnamed dromeosaur. We've got some updates on Utahraptor. And we have a dino on auction, as well as other news stories. It's an action-packed week.
Sure is.
We also have a dinosaur connection challenge on Alexander the Great, which Sabrina just, I think, came up with.
I didn't come up with it. One of our patrons requested.
Oh, they did? Okay. It's been a while, so I didn't realize that. And we have Dinosaur of the Day, Peloroplites, or maybe Peloroplites, since the in part comes from the hoplites.
In Greek.
It's an ankylosaur. It's a good name after the hoplites, if you're familiar. Is that why you're doing Alexander the Great for your Dinosaur Connection Challenge?
Well, it all worked out. Let's just say yes.
Okay. And of course, we have a fun fact. But before we get into all of that, first we want to thank some of our patrons, and a quick reminder that if you want ad-free versions of this show, or you want episodes of I Know Paleo or anything like that, you can join our Patreon and get lots of bonus content, as well as help us keep creating I Know Dino. And this week we'd like to thank Bill Jago, Geraldine, David, Elrex, Linda, the Georges family, Pachycelskisaurus, Thieving Raptor Lorenzo, Jurassic Jim, and Anna Rose. And thank you all for helping us to continue making I Know Dino.
Yes, amazing. We really appreciate it. Yay, Dino-it-alls. Jumping into the news, because I've got the new titanosaur.
And I assume it has a name. It beats out my unnamed dinosaur.
It sure does. It's Jiangxititan ganzhouensis. This was published in Historical Biology by Jinyo Mo and others, and it's open access if anyone wants to dive deep into this titanosaur. So Jiangxititan lived in the Late Cretaceous. It was found in Jiangxi Province, China.
No way.
I knew you were going to say something. And then in the Nanxiong Formation. And it's known for details in the neural spines and vertebrae.
I assume it was found in Guangzhou too, which is why it's ganzhouensis.
Yep, Guangzhou City in Jiangxi Province. Good guess. It would have looked like other titanosaurs walking on four legs with the long neck and tail and the small head. The holotype, though, only includes the vertebrae and ribs.
I was thinking you're being pretty vague with that description, but I suppose if all you have is vertebrae and ribs,
yes,
it's hard to get a lot of detail on what it would look like.
But these neural spines on the neck and back vertebrae, they are quote-unquote deeply bifurcated.
Mm-hmm. So they got two spines sticking up out of the top.
Yeah, well, they're high and they're widely separated. And this goes on the end of the neck and the beginning of the back.
Almost sounds like a dicraeosaurid, like a margosaurus or something.
Almost. They're more developed, these bifurcated spines, than sauropods such as Dromaeosaur, but less so than Dicraeosaurus.
Okay. If they were more developed than Dicraeosaurus, that would be quite impressive.
Yes. There's a cool comparison image in the paper that shows the vertebrae of Jiangxititan and other sauropods. And Jiangxititan, in comparison, it looks so much wider than the others. Like it's almost horizontal.
Oh, weird. Yeah. I see the picture in the paper, and it is extremely wide and very short, like dorsoventrally or top to bottom. It's very squished. It looks like something just squished it way down, because even the little canal for the nerve to go through, like the spinal cord, is very oblong.
Oh, yeah.
Something just smashed it way down.
Very oval.
Yeah.
Looks almost like a bow in the picture.
It does, yeah. Like a bow you'd tie on a shoe or something.
I was thinking on a gift.
Yeah, I guess there's that too.
So Jiangxititan is considered to be a titanosaur based on features of the vertebrae, which includes having some spongy bone. And according to the paper, there's, quote, as many as 15 titanosauriforms known from the Late Cretaceous of China, end quote. A few include Borealosaurus, Huabesaurus, and Qingxiusaurus. But until now, only one other sauropod had been found in this particular formation. It was Ganzhouensis sinensis. So this helps show the diversity of titanosauriforms in the late Cretaceous of what's now Asia.
15 titanosauriforms is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But the late Cretaceous of China is a very long period of time. That's like almost 40 million years. And it's also a very large area. So
Yes.
not too surprising.
And then other animals found in the same formation include theropods, ornithopods, crocodiles, turtles, lizards, mammals, and they've also found dinosaur eggs. Pretty cool.
Nice.
These fossils of Jiangxititan were found during construction work, with a couple of the vertebrae broken during the field work, but the fossils are now at the Natural History Museum of Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region.
Nice. It's interesting that with this crazy shaped vertebra, in the article they mention it being deformed a couple places, but they don't say that the overall shape is deformed, just like little details of it are deformed.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the strangest looking vertebrae I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's so flat.
It is. So flat and so bifurcated.
Yeah. What is happening? Makes you wonder what its neck looked like. Did it have a really wide, flat neck to match those vertebrae?
That would be cool.
It's so strange. Switching gears from titanosaurs to raptors, I've got that new large dromeosaurid.
The unnamed one.
Yes. Way to make it sound exciting.
Well, just pointing out why we talked about the titanosaur first.
Yeah. So this new dinosaur was described by Li Yang and others and published in Cretaceous Research. And just as a quick recap, some of the biggest dromaeosaurids or raptors so far are Achillobator. It's about 4 to 5 meters long and somewhere around 200 to 300 kilograms, or roughly 400 to 600 pounds.
Oof.
Pretty big. Utahraptor was around that size too. Some of the weight estimates are a little bit higher for Utahraptor, but similar length. Dakotaraptor was estimated to be up to about a meter or 3 feet longer, making it up to about 6 meters or 18 feet long. But the weight estimate for Dakotaraptor is about the same as Achillobator and Utahraptor, since Dakotaraptor is skinnier. Dakotaraptor, though, is a pretty controversial dinosaur and might not be valid. Talk a little bit more about that in our fun fact. But back to this new dromaeosaurid. It was found in the Songliao Basin in northeast China. It's the, quote, first discovery of a large-bodied dromaeosaurid, end quote, in the Camptosaurus Formation.
Nice.
And the Songliao Basin is a place we've talked about quite a bit. There's a lot of different dinosaurs that have been discovered there. So it's not just like, oh, it's the first one they found there, and they've only found like one other thing there. It's actually, it's a pretty productive dinosaur spot. And it's from the late Cretaceous, probably about 92 million years ago. Unfortunately, they did not find very much of this raptor. They found a hand claw and a single toe bone.
Oh, so not even the killing claw.
Yeah, because it's on the hand, not the foot. And yeah, like you said, they didn't name it. The hand claw is about 76 millimeters or 3 inches long, and that's with it missing part of the tip, so it would have been a little bit longer. Also, that measurement is from the back to the tip, sort of skipping over the curved gap in the middle. So it's like a very direct measurement.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when we're talking about claw lengths, what they do is they measure along the outer edge of it, because there's a lot of variability in how much the claws are curved and things like that. And then how you set it up in terms of measuring the overall length can be different. So a lot of times they just measure like along that outside edge. It also gives a bigger number, which makes it sound a little bit more exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how most theropod claws we've talked about are measured.
Although we also talk about how that's not even the full measurement because it was probably covered by something.
Yes, yeah, it's without the keratin sheath. So in life, considering it's only about 3 inches long, and that's the shorter way of measuring it, plus there would have been a little bit more on it, and then a keratin sheath over the top of that, now bigger bone, if you add the little missing piece to it, you could easily be at about half a foot long of claw.
Wow.
And that's a hand claw on a raptor, which presumably would have had a bigger claw on its foot.
Right. Was this claw pretty curved?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like in the medium curved part for a hand claw of a dromaeosaur. It is characteristically curved, like
Mhm.
basically all of these predatory dinosaurs had curved claws, but it's not extreme, I wouldn't say.
Okay. But still an impressive claw, even if you first hear, 3 inches, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like 3 inches on sort of the shorter measuring. I couldn't figure out exactly how long it would be if you measured it the other way, maybe 4 inches,
Mhm.
maybe 5 if you add on the broken piece, and then there would be some keratin over it. That's how I got to half a foot.
And it's much longer and stronger than our fingernails.
Yes, that is for sure. The toe bone that they have is significantly smaller than the hand claw. It's only about 32 millimeters or 1.25 inches long.
Hmm.
So it's a very small toe bone. It's the bone just before the claw. So the penultimate bone, I think is what they called it in the toe. It has a really rounded end, which would have been used for attaching to the claw. And it also has some deep grooves on it for tendons to attach to a presumably strong claw too and hold it in place so that it can't get shifted much from side to side.
Hmm.
Judging the size of an animal from a single claw and a single toe bone is very risky,
Sure.
I would say. I mean, look at something like Dinosaurus, where they found the big claws. They even had the whole arms of that dinosaur, and they're like, oh, it must have been this massive predator. And then it turned out to be a much smaller, much goofier herbivore.
Still massive, especially for an herbivore.
Yes. In this case, there are some details in the claw, which are pretty good indicators for it being a hand claw of a raptor, because they were also thinking, well, maybe it could have been a toe claw. There are
Mhm.
a lot of similarities, as we saw with Megaraptor, when people presumed that this really large claw came from a foot, but it turned out to be from a hand.
Mhm.
But we've learned from our mistakes, and now we know some other details to look for other than just the size alone. So we do think it's a large hand claw, and we do think it's from a raptor, assuming that it is similar in scale to other dinosaurs.
Which is all you can go by at this point.
Yeah, I think you could pretty safely say that it is a large raptor. The hand claw, assuming that it's from the first finger, is quite a bit smaller than Utahraptor, but it's sort of between the size of Achillobator and Deinonychus, although closer to the Achillobator side of the spectrum.
Okay, and that's why they're saying it's the first large-bodied dromaeosaur.
Yeah. Yeah. I think an estimate of over 100 kilograms or 200 pounds is probably pretty reasonable.
Hmm.
And also, based on some of the details of the claw, they think it's probably closely related to Achillobator. So, if we can go by Achillobator at all for the sizing, and that was in the 2 to 300 kilogram range and about 4 to 5 meters long, it might not have been quite that big because the claw is a little bit smaller. It's also a pretty different shape, but is probably roughly in the ballpark,
Hmm.
which is really big.
Yes.
Probably almost tall enough to look you directly in the face, I would say. It's about face height. So that's the new dromaeosaur. Hopefully they find more bones of this, because that toe bone and hand claw are very interesting, but not enough to really tell us much about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you said, it's a productive site, so there's hope.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of Utahraptor, we've got a quick update to Utahraptor's age. This was published in Geosciences by Robert Jokel and others. And they were looking at the yellow cat member of the Cedar Mountain Formation in Utah. That's where Utahraptor Ridge is located. You could guess why it's called Utahraptor Ridge, because they found Utah raptors there.
Makes sense.
So in that spot, they did zircon radiometric dating, and they found that the age of the rock is about 135 million years old. There's also a double peak of carbon isotopes in the rock, which seems to correspond to what's called the Weissert or Weissert event, a period when carbon dioxide levels dropped precipitously by about 40%, which led to a period of approximately 700,000 years of global cooling.
Hmm.
Global temperatures as a result dropped by about 3 degrees Celsius or 5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an extreme change in global climate. And that was likely enough to start forming ice at the poles and probably a whole suite of other changes around the world.
Definitely affected life on the planet.
Oh, yeah. But in this context, the important thing is you can see this specific sort of change in carbon dioxide levels in the rock. And we know that that happened roughly 135 million years ago. And that agrees with the zircon radiometric dating. So there's sort of two pieces of evidence that the Utahraptor ridge is about 135 million years old. As phys.org put it, quote, Utahraptor is going to need 10 million more candles on its next birthday cake.
That's a lot of candles.
It is. I really enjoy that image. That's because previously Utahraptor was estimated to be 125 million years ago rather than 135 million years ago. So it's 10 million years older now.
Mm-hmm.
There had been thoughts of this potentially being the case, apparently. I didn't know that because it wasn't published, but that was why they were investigating this, to try to narrow down that timing, because there's basically a really big gap in the fossil record where we had stuff from 125 million years ago with the Utahraptor previous dating and other things in the formation. And we had stuff from older than that, like 145 million years ago, but we didn't really have anything from 135. And we had a pretty continuous piece of rock. So a lot of people were thinking, well, there's got to be 135 million years or, something in that 20 million year gap somewhere in here. How have we not found anything? It's very strange.
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of the spots they thought might be sort of in the middle, and they found that it was. As one of the co-authors put it, quote, this is an agenda-setting discovery that will reverberate for decades, end quote.
Yeah, I could see that.
Definitely. I know we run into this problem when we're talking about the ages of dinosaurs, and we're looking at these older papers, especially when you're doing a dinosaur of the day from something from like the 1960s or something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a whole lot of revisions to the ages of formation since then. You got to be careful because it's like in the paper, they might say, oh, it's about 90 million years old based on the geology. But then there's been a big update to the geology since then.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, it's not 90 million years old anymore. It's 110 or it's only 70 or who knows what.
That's why I usually read multiple papers for the dinosaur of the day.
Yes. It can be really hard to stay on top of the geology too, though, because even something as specific as the yellow cat member of the Cedar Mountain Formation can vary depending on which level of the yellow cat member it is and where exactly it is in, like what state it's in, basically what outcrop it is. It can vary by millions of years. But there you go. If you're a Utahraptor fan, it's now earlier in the early Cretaceous.
Yep.
Which kind of makes it cooler. I always think it's more interesting when the bigger dinosaurs occurred earlier in the fossil record, because we're so used to the latest stuff being the biggest in a lot of cases.
But evolution's weird.
It is, yeah. And we've got an update on the potential of more dinosaurs being repatriated to Brazil. But first, we're going to pause for a quick sponsor break.
In some other news, researchers are requesting Irritator to be repatriated to Brazil.
Oh, the floodgates are open now. Utahraptor came back.
Yes. And we talked about Irritator back in episode 96. That was a while ago now.
They weren't just happy to get rid of it with how irritating it was to excavate, thus the name.
It wasn't irritating to excavate. It was irritating to prepare.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because, like you were saying, they were irritated because the skull was plastered in a way by fossil poachers to make the snout look longer or more complete.
Oh, that is irritating. Irritating poachers.
Irritating in a few ways. Now, Irritator is a spinosaur. It lived in the early Cretaceous in what is now Brazil. And the specimen currently is part of the State Museum of Natural History Stuttgart collections in Germany. More than 2,000 paleontologists and supporters signed an open letter to repatriate the fossil to Brazil. Just real quick about laws in Brazil. In 1942, Brazil passed a law that said fossils found in Brazil belong there and can't be traded or exported without authorization. And then in 1990, Brazil also passed a law that any holotype must stay in Brazil.
Oh, that's a little older than I thought, because I thought with Utahraptor they were quoting laws that were more recent than that. Maybe they passed even more laws later.
These are the ones I know of for the Irritator case. And Irritator is very important because it's the most complete spinosaurid skull known.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Now, earlier this year in May, Paleontologia Electronica published a paper that re-examined the skull of Irritator. In the paper, there was an ethics statement by the authors that said, quote, "As the specimen described here originates from Brazil, and there currently is a debate about the legality and ethics of working with Brazilian specimens deposited outside of this country, we acknowledge the possibly problematic status of SMNS 58022. That's the Irritator specimen number.
Oh, okay. It's good to know the specimen number.
Yeah.
It's also good to know that they're aware of the potential controversy.
Right. They also said that in the paper, the specimen was purchased by the museum in 1991 from a German fossil dealer. And they said the specimen was imported to Germany before 1990. Aside from all that, for this paper, they did CT scans that are available to download for free. So that's good.
I do like that distinction between the holotypes always have to stay in the country and the other stuff needs approval to leave, because it sort of makes sense in terms of if you have a whole bunch of a fossil, like in the US, we have tons of T-Rex, and sometimes a T-Rex gets sent off to another country, and I'm like, I don't know how to feel about this because it's our fossil. We should keep it, keep it close to where it was found and everything. But we have so many of them, and we do have the holotype, and we have several other copies of T-Rex, so it never really bothers me that much. It's more just like when these things come up, I think about it. But I like that distinction where it's like keep the holotypes in the country they were found in, and then the other ones get approval for. But I could see how in this case, if they argue, well, we think this person got approval for it, it left before 1990, before the rule about the holotype was established, they might dig in their heels a little bit more than they did with Ubi rajara. Plus, Irritator is a way more exciting specimen than Ubi rajara, like the most complete skull ever.
Oh,
and all that kind of stuff.
Ubi rajara had a lot of interesting features that were important too.
It did, but it wasn't like a big draw to a museum. Like a big spinosaurid, it's like having a big T-Rex. Like that really gets people excited and wanting to go to the museum. Ubi rajara is really cool to us paleo nerds, but I think to like a typical person, it might not be quite as exciting.
That is hard for me to consider.
Hard to put yourself in those shoes of a not super big dinosaur fan.
Well, anyway, the author of the paper that re-examined the skull of Irritator, Evers, was quoted in an article on EOS saying they did, quote, "a poor job on the statement," the ethics statement in the paper, by calling it an ethics statement when the issue is a legal claim. And Evers has also signed the letter along with the 2,000 paleontologists and supporters.
Interesting to return it. Yeah, the difference between ethics and legality is a whole other issue.
Yes. So the paper, after it was published, it was taken down for 2 days, according to EOS, but then the editorial board put it back up because they found no wrongdoing from the authors. Again, this is the new paper that came out in May about that re-examined the skull. According to the article on EOS, the museum in Germany is taking all of this very seriously and looking into it. So maybe it will be repatriated at some point. And paleontologists, including Aline Gilardi, who we've had on our show, they're working on a list of more than 500 holotype fossils currently in Germany, Japan, and the US that may have been illegally taken from Brazil. And there are paleontological societies in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Mexico, and Peru, and they formed a consortium to work together for future cases of repatriation.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like keep the fossils in the vicinity where they were found. It's so much easier for researchers and for getting people excited about paleontology.
Yeah. So maybe we'll be hearing about more of these cases soon, and hopefully they go through quickly.
500 examples, though, is going to take a while.
Yes.
Unless they can get a whole chunk of them at once, that they're like all at some one museum. Like, for example, somewhere in the US, they could be in one of the major museums, a whole set of them from years of expeditions to the same quarry. That happens a lot. And then that'd be a lot easier to repatriate all at once.
Yeah.
I know that's what happened with AMNH and some of the Mongolian stuff. They repatriated a whole bunch of stuff at once. It wasn't just like one at a time.
So that might be the case. I don't know the details here. But speaking of dinosaurs moving around, there's a Camptosaurus, Barry the Camptosaurus, is going to auction in October.
Controversial dinosaurs ending up in places.
Well, depends who you ask if it's controversial. And October, because it is October, by the time this episode airs, end of October. It's a nearly complete skeleton, Barry is. The skull's 90% complete, and the skeleton's about 80% complete.
That's pretty complete.
Yes. It'll be at auction in Paris, October 20th. And Barry was found in the 1990s. Ooh, that sounds old when I say 1990s.
Yep. It's been a while.
Yeah. And anyway, in Wyoming, in the U.S., lived about 150 million years ago in the late Jurassic. Barry got its name after Barry James, who prepared the skeleton in 2000, and the skeleton has since been acquired and further prepared by the Italian laboratory Zoic. So it's expected to sell for up to $1.2 million US.
I mean, it might, but it's an ornithopod, the close relatives of hadrosaurids. And we all know the duckbills do not get much love.
No, but with a 90% complete skull and an 80% complete skeleton, that's a pretty big draw.
Yeah, but over $1 million, it'll be interesting to see what it goes for. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll hear about it. I mean, Barry's a pretty good size, about 16.4 feet or 5 meters long and 6.8 feet or 2.1 meter tall.
It sounds cool, but again, this is we're the dinosaur fans talking.
Yeah, that's true.
Versus the people, probably a private collector. How much are they going to want to pay for a hadrosaur?
Well, maybe a museum will get it. Then.
Yeah. I shouldn't say hadrosaur because it's an ornithopod.
Yeah.
But yeah, it could go to a museum. If the price is low enough, that would be good. That maybe a museum could afford it.
Yeah. And just as a quick refresher, Camptosaurus was an ornithischian and had a beak, ate plants, walked on 2 legs, and had robust legs and broad feet. And Camptosaurus was our dinosaur of the day way, way, way back in episode 7.
Oh, man. There's probably some updates to be made.
Probably. Especially if Barry gets studied.
Yeah, that's true.
Camptosaurus was first discovered in 1879 in Wyoming and then named based on a partial skeleton by O.C. Marsh in 1879. So it's a Bone Wars dinosaur.
Yeah.
That has lasted.
We'd have to dig in to figure out if Barry... Yeah. If Barry is much more complete or more complete than the other specimens that we have. But I would have expected in the press release for them to say the most complete Camptosaurus ever. They would not let that opportunity go to waste. So I presume that there's at least a more complete skull out there since this one's only 90% complete. Hopefully.
Oh no, I haven't looked into Camptosaurus since episode 7. So
yeah.
Been a while.
Yeah. But it would be a shame if it is the most complete and it ended up in a private collection.
Last bit of news is that the Crystal Palace Park dinosaurs are now available as 3D models.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they look really cool. They're all available on Sketchfab.
Oh, nice.
And they were made using photogrammetry, and then they're now interactive models of all 29 sculptures. This will help a lot with restoration work, too, because the models in real life are fragile.
I wonder if they did that because remember somebody hung off the Megalosaurus jaw or something and broke it off, and then they 3D printed a replica and attached that. Maybe somebody said, hey, wait a second, we should scan all of it, and then we won't have to sculpt the jaw. We'll have it already there. Mm-hmm. So any little piece you want, you can just cut out of your model.
That could be.
Throw it in a 3D printer, and you're good to go.
Yeah, it could be. And then bonus for us because we can see it online.
That's so cool that they made them available on Sketchfab because that's a really easy to access thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we could maybe I'll print out a little Megalosaurus.
Oh, you could do all 3.
That's true. They look so similar.
Yeah, but then you'd have your own little Crystal Palace.
Yeah, that's true. He gets the little bump on the iguanodon nose. That's the main difference when I look at him. I guess Hylaeosaurus is a little bumpier too.
Yeah.
I wonder if they modeled the head separately since it's in a different spot now.
I didn't see a separate head.
Okay. They probably did it all once because they did put a replacement head already on it. So they probably just photogrammetry scanned it with the replacement.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Oh, bummer. I just checked. It doesn't look like you can actually download it. So there will be no 3D printing happening, but they're still really cool to see online. Crystal Palace Park is so cool.
It is.
If you're ever in London, highly recommend.
Okay, now for the moment that Garrett's been waiting for since I told him about this Dinosaur Connection Challenge. I can't do a good drum roll.
Very nice.
Thanks. We got a challenge to connect dinosaurs to Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia.
Very cool.
Yep, this was a request from Tyrant King, so thank you.
I was telling Sabrina, before podcasts were a thing, or at least before I had a phone that could handle podcasts, I listened to like a 12-hour lecture on Alexander the Great on either CDs or cassette tapes.
Which is good because I actually don't know too much about Alexander the Great. I really focused in on the dinosaur connection part of this.
Well, I mean, if you think episode 7 was a long time ago, when I listened to this lecture on Alexander the Great, it was extremely long ago.
Well, maybe it'll come back to you as we're talking.
That's true.
So yeah, I didn't want to go too deep into the history of Alexander the Great because our focus is on dinosaurs, and there are a lot of great history podcasts about him.
I can give a cliff note.
Okay.
So he basically inherited this amazing army from his dad,
Mm-hmm.
who didn't ever go and conquer everything. And he was like, I bet we could conquer a bunch of stuff. And then he did. That's basically the synopsis.
Good summary. Yeah.
And named a whole ton of cities Alexandria all over the place.
So yeah, he was a conqueror. He was a military leader. He was the son of King Philip II of Macedon. His mother was Olympias. He was tutored by Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher and polymath. Side fact there. According to an article on Live Science, quote, from his earliest days, Olympias, that's his mother, had encouraged him to believe that he was a descendant of heroes and gods. Nothing he had accomplished would have discouraged this belief, end quote. So that probably helped him with his conquering mentality.
That's quite a bit of boosting him up with some self-confidence
Yes.
at a young age.
But he died pretty young. He only lived to age 32.
Yeah.
And he was the king of Persia. This was between 330 to 323 BC. There's a lot of myths and legends around him, and a lot of great sources about these myths and legends around him. But the one I leaned on most heavily here is an article called Dragon Myth and Alexander the Great, The Case of the Serpent Sire and the Dragon in India. This was published in the Journal of the Department of Classics and Ancient History in the University of Exeter by Christian through Jerslev. So one of the myths about Alexander the Great is that he was sired by a supernatural serpent or dragon that was possibly Zeus. And this myth was perhaps circulated by his mother, Olympias.
His number one supporter.
Yes. And Alexander the Great was often worshipped as a son of a dragon.
Huh. Well, there's a pretty good dinosaur connection.
Yeah. Somewhat of a side note, there's a book called History of Alexander the Great, and in it is an image depicting his mother, Olympias, in bed with a dragon. And according to Feminar, Medieval Women and Gender Index, the dragon really is, quote, Egyptian sorcerer and exiled pharaoh Nectanebo disguised as a dragon, end quote.
Huh. Not what I would have expected.
No. Yeah, a lot of interesting things come up. And of course, we're using our connection here of dragons and dinosaurs to tie that all together.
Yep, because we think dinosaur bones may have inspired dragons.
Yes. Now, quickly about his conquest of Persia. He won 3 key battles when he was conquering Persia. And then after that, that's where we get to the dragon part. So not too much about Persia specifically. But after that, he went to what is now Pakistan on the Indian subcontinent. And that brings me to the next tale about him and dragons/serpents. So there are a few conflicting stories of Alexander and a dragon or serpent from then India. In one version, Alexander orders his men to kill this dragon that lived there. This version, I'm going to quote it, this is from Maximus of Tyre, quote, Taxiles, an Indian king, showed Alexander the marvels of the land of India, huge rivers and many-colored birds and fragrant plants and other marvels new to Greek eyes. And among all this, he showed him an immense creature, the sacred image of Dionysus, to which the Indians used to make sacrifice. This was a snake 500 feet long, living in a hollow place in a deep chasm, surrounded by a high wall surmounting the cliffs. The Indians supplied it with sheep and oxen from their flocks and herds to eat, and it devoured them greedily, more like a tyrant than a god, end quote.
That's intense. 500 feet long.
Yes.
It's bigger than any dinosaur.
And I think in that version, or at least in some versions, Alexander orders his men to kill this dragon/serpent.
That's quite a command.
Yes. But there is another version where he doesn't kill the dragon. This one is from Claudius Alienus. Quote, Alexander encountered a dragon which lived in a cavern and was regarded sacred by the Indians who paid it great and superstitious reverence. The Indians went to all lengths, imploring Alexander to permit nobody to attack the serpent, and he assented to their wish. Now, as they passed by the cavern and caused a noise, the serpent noticed it, and it hissed and snorted so violently that all were terrified and confounded. It was reported to measure 70 cubits, although it was not visible in all its length, for it only put its head out. At any rate, its eyes are said to have been the size of a large, round Macedonian shield, end quote.
And 1 cubit is 1.5 feet. So 70 cubits is a little over 100 feet. It's like the length of a titanosaur.
Yeah. With much bigger eyes.
Yeah, for real. As big as a shield.
Yeah.
That would be the biggest eye of anything ever. Even bigger than the colossal and giant squids, which are only like 1 foot.
So yeah, like we were saying, there's legends of dragons and serpents from all over the world, possibly inspired by dinosaur fossils, and from way before when Richard Owen coined the term dinosaur. I mean, obviously we're talking about Alexander the Great here. But there are other legends. Like in the past, we've talked about large dinosaur tracks in Western Australia that were thought to be enormous emu prints.
Yep, from the Emu Man.
Yep, so that is our connection there. Dinosaurs to Alexander the Great.
He may or may not have ordered his men to slay a huge dinosaur-like serpent. Probably not, but maybe.
And he was thought by some to be the son of a dragon.
That's a cool one. I want that legend associated with me.
I don't know if you'll get that.
Probably not.
Maybe someone who likes dragons?
I'm the son of someone who likes dragons. Not even someone who likes dragons.
Well, I don't know if your parents like dragons so much, so I don't know if we could say the son of someone who likes dragons.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But you're someone who likes dragons.
That's a very big claim to fame.
We're going to take a quick break for our sponsors, and then we'll get into our dinosaur of the day. And now onto our dinosaur of the day, Peloroplites, which was a request from Resident Zeno, aka Seth and Sabrina, via Patreon or Discord, so thank you. It was a nodosaurid that lived in the Late Cretaceous in what is now Utah in the US, found in the Cedar Mountain Formation. It looked similar to Borealopelta. As a nodosaurid, it wouldn't have had a club tail, but it walked on all fours, it was low to the ground, and of course it was covered in armor. And it's one of the largest known nodosaurids. It's similar in size to Sauropelta. Originally, it was estimated to be about 16 to 18 feet or 5 to 5.5 meters long, but in 2016, Gregory Paul estimated that it was even bigger, about 20 feet or 6 meters long and weighing 2 tons. The skull's estimated to be about 22 inches or 56 centimeters long. It's not known how many vertebrae it had, but it was covered in scutes and spikes, and it may have had large spikes on its neck and shoulders. It had a relatively long snout, robust jaws, and large teeth, so it may have eaten tough plants.
Something you don't always hear about with Ankylosaurus.
Yeah. It also had a robust pelvis, but I feel like most plant eaters did.
Yeah.
And it had stout legs. The ulna, the lower leg bone, was long and straight, and the ankle bone, the astragalus, wasn't fused to the shin. The type and only species is Peloroplites cedramontanus. The genus name means monstrous heavy one, and the name also comes from hoplites, which means heavily armored, and it's named because it's like a heavily armored soldier.
Yeah, and the hoplites in ancient Greek times were a pretty specific type of soldier, and they were in Alexander the Great's army.
Ooh.
So there's another connection. There's a dinosaur that's named after a unit that was in his army.
There we go.
But that's why we're saying it Peloroplites and not Peloroplites or something, which is sort of how it looks if you Latinize it.
It does. The species name, Cedramontanus, refers to the Cedar Mountain Formation.
Oh, I see. For some reason, I thought it was going to be related to Montana,
It does sound like that.
but it's Montana's for the mountain.
Mm-hmm. It was named from a partial skull and skeleton in 2008 by Kenneth Carpenter and others. The fossils were mentioned first in a publication in 2001 by Berg and Bird in a paper about the animals of Price River 2 quarry. Then more fossils were found, and then Kenneth Carpenter and others described and named it in 2008. More fossils assigned to Peloroplites include vertebrae, parts of the feet, legs, osteoderms, parts of the pelvis, parts of the shoulder, arms, and other fragments. And the fossils were red and gray. The fossils are at the College of Eastern Utah's Prehistoric Museum in Price, Utah.
So pretty close to where they were found.
Yeah. Some unique features of the dinosaur include not having premaxillary teeth at the tip of the snout, having small, blunt squamosal horns in the back of the skull, and then some other details in the bones, including in the back. Oh, and one cool thing is they also found all the hand bones of the dinosaur.
Wow. That's cool. Those are some pretty small, intricate bones to find. A lot of times with ankylosaurs, you're lucky if you get a skull.
Yeah. And then all the hand bones there helped Phil Center in 2011 when he suggested that the hands of Peloroplites and other ankylosaurs were positioned in a way similar to sauropods. Got to work those sauropods in.
Fun connection between sauropods and ankylosaurs, too.
Yeah. And then we connected the ankylosaur to Alexander the Great, so it's kind of like we had connected the sauropods to Alexander the Great.
True.
Anyway, Peloroplites lived in a wet environment, either with lakes or rivers. Other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place included the ankylosaur Cedar Mountain, the hadrosauroid Eolambia, the brachiosaurid Abiosaurus, also Deinonychus, the tyrannosaurid Moros, Coelurosaurs, and the allosauride Ceats. And other animals that lived around the same time and place included crocodilians, amphibians, fish, pterosaurs, and mammals.
And our fun fact of the day, as promised, is about Dakotaraptor. And it is that the Dakotaraptor is at least partially a chimera, meaning it's a mixture of different animals that were first thought to come from one individual.
This is a conversation that's been going on in paleontology for a while.
Yeah, at SVP, anytime somebody mentions Dakotaraptor, somebody else has like an eye roll and says something about like, oh, Dakotaraptor, that's probably not even a real dinosaur.
I don't know if I'd go as far as to say an eye roll, but a disagreement.
Yeah. So the word chimera, like many of my favorite words and legends, comes from ancient Greek.
Ooh, bringing it back to ancient Greece, because we had Alexander the Great.
Oh, that's true, yeah. So chimera translates as she-goat, and it could breathe fire. Its body was mostly a lion, but it had a goat head sticking out of its back, sort of a goat head and neck, and then it had a snake for a tail. It was pretty cool.
That is.
There's a really fantastic Etruscan sculpture from about 2,400 years ago. I think the estimate puts it less than a century before Alexander the Great, right in that same time period. This sculpture is about 129 centimeters or 4 foot 3 inches long. It's bronze. It is really beautiful. Apparently, it's on display in Florence, Italy. I really want to go see it. It's considered maybe the best piece of Etruscan sculpture work that's still around. So anyway, just random art side fun fact. But back to Dakotaraptor. Dakotaraptor was named in October of 2015 by Robert De Palma and others. And it's one of the most exciting dinosaurs that was discovered the first year of our podcast, I would say.
Yeah, I remember.
De Palma described it by saying, quote, "For all intents and purposes, this was the Ferrari of the predators of its day," end quote. Elaborating with, quote, "It could turn on a dime, run very fast. It could easily jump 2 or 3 times its body height. It could kill any herbivorous dinosaur that it encountered. It was a lethal animal," end quote.
Other than the lethal animal and killing herbivorous dinosaurs, it sounds like it'd be a good basketball player. Turn on a dime, run really fast, jump.
Very athletic, yeah. It also had a really big sickle claw on its foot, at 24 centimeters long. Of course, that's measured around the curve, not just point to back.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it 9.5 inches long, just the bone. Again, there would be keratin on top of that, which is basically the exact same length as a Utahraptor claw, the largest claw on a Utahraptor. Dakotaraptor's claw is a little bit, quote unquote, more robust, which in this case basically just means it's a little bit wider or thicker than Utahraptor's claw.
Although Utahraptor sounds like had a more robust body.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a weird combination. One of the coolest things about Dakotaraptor was that they found bones from its forearms with what looked like quill knobs. In other words, the really large raptor had large feathers on its arms that, were big enough feathers that they attached directly to the bone, as many primary feathers do on birds.
Mm-hmm.
Although we don't think that Dakotaraptor could fly, given its massive weight and its long tail and long legs and other proportions that don't really make any sense for a bird.
Yeah, it was more like the feathers were good for covering its nests.
Yeah, or possibly balancing while fighting or showing off to mates, things like that. Still having big feathers can be very useful, even if you're not flying. In addition to those forelimb bones and the claw, they also found a tail vertebra that looks very raptor-like. In technical terms, it has an extremely long pre-zygapophysis, which is a part of the vertebra that extends really far forward past at least 2, but probably many more vertebrae to stiffen them together. So it's like one vertebra that has this big old crazy spiny thing sticking off of it that overlaps with a bunch of other vertebrae. It's really weird. Something that you, I think, mostly only see in these derived raptors. It's kind of similar to ossified tendons in function. So like those really hard tendons that run along the length of the tail of some dinosaurs. But instead of using tendons, in this case, it's like the vertebra itself stretches way out in order to stiffen the tail. The single partial vertebra is about 5 centimeters or 2 inches long, but was probably 7 centimeters or about 3 inches long when it was alive because it's sort of missing little pieces of it, which is really good evidence for a large raptor in the Hell Creek Formation living alongside T-Rex.
Yeah.
Because those vertebrae are very unusual. It's very much a raptor thing. It's a big vertebra. It doesn't look like it's from the larger part of the tail, so it's not like a large vertebra in the scheme of a raptor tail, because you can tell that this one's from farther back in the tail, and it's still already 3 inches long. So you can imagine if it's got like 50 of these vertebrae, it's got a decent length to it. Victoria Arbor and others published a paper just 3.5 months after the original description of Dakotaraptor in February of 2016, and the title of their paper in PeerJ is, quote, "The furculae of the dromeosaurid dinosaur Dakotaraptor steini are trionechid turtle entoplastra," end quote.
And what does that mean?
So basically, the collarbone of Dakotaraptor was actually from a turtle, specifically the belly part of the shell, which is called the plastron.
The belly part of the shell was thought to be the collarbone. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's very different.
They both have sort of a boomerang shape to them,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see how you'd make the mistake. But yeah, it's not a good look for Dakotaraptor,
No.
because at the very minimum now, it's a chimera of a turtle and a raptor.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in the original paper, they had the holotype, which had several different bones and teeth, and then they referred a bunch of things that they were less certain belonged with Dakotaraptor, some other bones. But this plastron was actually included in the holotype. So it wasn't like a bone that they were like, we think this is probably Dakotaraptor, we're going to refer it to the genus. They were confident enough that it came from this specific individual, not just any Dakotaraptor, but this specific holotype, that they combined it all together as like, this is all definitely one new species.
That's interesting that this paper that talked about it being part of a turtle came just 3.5 months after the original description was published.
Yes.
It's very quick.
It makes me think that Victoria Arbor saw that furcula and said like, whoa, that is a part of a turtle. and confirmed it immediately. Because even getting a paper from thought to publication in 3.5 months is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you have it, actually, I should say, fully written, getting it published in 3.5 months is pretty impressive. So, yeah, they must have noticed very quickly. Dakotaraptor was again called out as a probable chimera, or a mixture of different dinosaurs, in 2020. That came with the description of Dromeosaur, aka the Navajo warrior raptor. They said, quote, "It is noted that Dakotaraptor is likely a chimera, and portions of the described skeleton have already been shown to not represent a dromeosaurid, namely the furcula, re-identified as part of a turtle plastron," end quote. So that's referring back to the Victoria Arbor paper.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was interesting that they said portions of the described skeleton. I couldn't find any other portions of it, just the one portion. But again, a lot of people seem to be skeptical of Dakotaraptor at this point and just how much of it belongs to a raptor.
Mm-hmm.
Because Dakotaraptor was found in a multi-species bone bed and it wasn't articulated, it's really hard to know how many of the bones actually are from Dakotaraptor.
Right.
So we're all kind of just waiting for a follow-up paper reviewing all of the bones to confirm just how many of them should be considered Dakotaraptor versus another animal, and if the name Dakotaraptor is still even going to be used afterwards.
Yeah, because multi-species bone bed and not articulated means that there are multiple types of animals that were all fossilized together or found fossilized together, and Dakotaraptor not being articulated means its bones were a bit scattered or just not connected. So it would be very hard to know exactly for sure this came from the same individual. These bones came from the same individual.
Yeah. It's hard to know it came from the same species, let alone the same actual living creature.
Mm-hmm.
I should mention there is one other raptor from the Hell Creek. It's a Achillobator, which is much smaller than Dakotaraptor. I double-checked its description, and they didn't mention anything about it being potentially a juvenile, but there's also no mention of lags, fused bones, or age in general, so I don't know if anyone has really looked into this question at all. It's not too surprising that they haven't looked into this question, if they haven't, because Achillobator is only known from a maxilla, or the snout, which includes some teeth, and then parts of the jaw. So they don't have any long bones like a femur or humerus or something to cut into, and cutting into this like really beautiful maxilla would be quite a shame to just look for some lags in it. And a lot of times you don't get them anyway.
Although they've got more than the unnamed new dromaeosaur.
In terms of the head?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. Or I guess overall, too, it's better to have a maxilla and a jaw than it is to have a claw and a tiny toe bone.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have any overlapping bones with Dakotaraptor to compare with Achillobator. The closest we have is that there were some teeth in the holotype of Dakotaraptor, but that seems really risky to use because who knows if they're actually from a Dakotaraptor. If you're in a multi-species bone bed and there's some teeth there, teeth get shed from dinosaurs like crazy. And they were just shedding those teeth everywhere. And I think the teeth that they assigned were shed teeth. So it's just really, I think at this point, hard to compare Dakotaraptor to Achillobator because the only overlapping thing we have is teeth. And yeah, it's hard to say what those teeth even came from. But even if Dakotaraptor and Achillobator are the same species, which I haven't seen anybody propose, it would still be really interesting to know that Achillobator could get that big.
Mm-hmm.
If that was the case, the name Dakotaraptor would go away and it would just be an adult Achillobator at that point. Maybe it could be extreme sexual dimorphism, like one of them's really tiny and the other one's really huge. Who knows?
Maybe.
We have so little of both of these dinosaurs that it's really hard to know. And we also just really need a redescription of Dakotaraptor where somebody carefully reanalyzes all the bones and figures out which of them belong to a raptor versus other animals at the very least.
Yes, I keep hearing rumblings. I'm sort of waiting before we revisit that one as a dinosaur of the day because it's been requested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would. I mean, it would be fun to revisit with a better description because it is one of the coolest dinosaurs. And we know there was this really big raptor in the Hell Creek with T-Rex and Triceratops and a lot of other really famous dinosaurs. And knowing more about what it ate and how big it was and all that kind of stuff would be great to know.
Well, this really turned into a Raptor and Alexander the Great episode.
It did, yeah.
And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, then please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to our show. And stay tuned. Next week, we have an interview with the paleo artist Brian Eng.
An update on some of the projects we've talked about with him before.
Yes. Thanks again, and until next time.